At 6 a.m. on January 29, 2022, a blizzard had engulfed Canton, Massachusetts. On the snowy lawn of a suburban house, Canton police officers found Boston police veteran John Okeefe lying unconscious in the cold. Cradling his bleeding body was 44-year-old Karen Reed, his girlfriend. First responders later testified that Reed was hysterical and inconsolable, repeatedly moaning, "I hit him. I hit him." Please help this channel grow, like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. This heart-rending scene, John's tortured body in the snow, Karen's anguished cries, was the opening image in a story that would grip the nation. The question hanging over every onlooker: what happened to John? And even now, as a jury has finally spoken, the answer still remains shrouded in doubt and snow. John Okeefe was not just a random victim. He was a 46-year-old Boston police officer, a 16-year veteran of the force. To those who knew him, he was Johnny, or JJ, affectionately called the patron saint of Canton by people who loved him. Raised in suburban Braintree, John had a master's in criminal justice and had switched to an administrative role on the BPD after a family tragedy. In 2014, his sister and brother-in-law died months apart, and John quietly took in his two young nieces, then aged 6 and 3, raising them as his own. Friends described him as a loving uncle and a dedicated officer. His kindness extended to others. He even became godfather to a colleague's newborn when tragedy struck his friend. In short, everyone in Canton knew John as a generous soul who put family first. Karen Reed, meanwhile, had a very different background. At 44 years old, she was a successful financial analyst who had worked at Fidelity and even taught finance at Bentley University. Born in 1980, Karen was smart, driven, and by all accounts attractive. She and John had once dated briefly in the 2000s, but had drifted apart. During the isolation of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, they reconnected on Facebook and revived their relationship. Over the next 2 years, Reed became very much part of Okeefe's life. She often stayed at his Canton home, which he shared with his two young nieces, helping care for the children and becoming part of the Okeefe family. Yet the couple never actually lived together. By late January 2022, friends say tensions had quietly grown between John and Karen. According to investigators, the night before his death was marked by a brewing argument. Court documents later revealed that on the evening of January 28, the pair went out to drink at local Canton bars. They arrived at C.F. McCarthy's around 9 p.m., then moved on to the Waterfall Bar and Grill by 11 p.m. There, they joined a group of acquaintances including fellow Boston cop Brian Albert, his wife Nicole, and others celebrating the Albert son's birthday. Even before midnight, investigators found evidence of strain. Karen left angry voicemails for John. One voicemail captured on police records had her raging, "You offend loser, F, yourself," and "John, I hate you." Those messages hinted at a volatile relationship underneath the veneer of romance. When the bar closed around midnight, the Alberts invited everyone to continue the celebration at their nearby home on Fairview Road. Security footage later confirmed that Karen and John pulled up to the Albert residence around 12:24 a.m. Karen, unfamiliar with the neighborhood, had called Nicole Albert for directions around 12:14 a.m., and they arrived shortly after. But tensions flared again once inside the parked Lexus. According to Reed, Okeefe became frustrated with her about decisions regarding the children, and they began fighting in the car. In a heated exchange over childcare, John exploded at Karen. Karen later told police she felt humiliated and angry. In the middle of that argument, around 12:30 a.m., Karen brusquely drove off, leaving John parked outside the Albert home. She assumed he would simply call or walk home afterward. Security logs show that John's phone made 36 steps, tracked by a navigation app on his phone, between 12:27 and 12:32 a.m. before going silent as if he briefly walked from the street toward the house. Karen drove away, believing the fight was over. She left John at the party. The Alberts later said they never even saw him enter their house. Over the next 2 hours she was at her own home, about a mile away, apparently sleeping until something panicked her awake. It was still before dawn when things took a turn none of them could have predicted. Shortly after Karen's Lexus pulled away, her boyfriend mysteriously vanished. Surveillance data and cell phone logs would later show that John's phone abruptly stopped recording movement at 12:32 a.m. The couple's phones then lay untouched for hours. Sometime before 4 a.m., Karen finally awoke and frantically began calling friends. At 4:53 a.m. she phoned close friend Carrie Roberts, shouting that, "John is dead. Carrie, John is dead." Paramedics later testified that Karen seemed convinced John might have been hit by a plow during the blizzard. In terror, she even said to Carrie, "What if he's dead? What if a plow hit him? I don't remember anything from last night. We drank so much I don't remember anything." Through her panic she kept asking, "Could I have done something? Could he have been hit by a plow? Maybe I, hit him." Words overheard by John's 8-year-old niece as she huddled in the car. At about 5:07 a.m., dawn barely breaking, home security cameras finally caught a crucial image. Karen's Lexus backing out of the Albert driveway. In the grainy video, the SUV clearly nudged John's own parked vehicle in the dark. Okeefe's silver Chevy Traverse lurched slightly. Karen had just arrived moments earlier to look for John, and now she was leaving. Investigators would later note that her passenger side tail lamp was indeed broken, suggesting a collision, but they found no chunks of that tail lamp on the driveway. Just a few minutes later, at around 6 a.m., tragedy's final act played out on the lawn of 34 Fairview. Karen and Carrie Roberts were at the Alberts house checking rooms when they stumbled onto a horrifying sight. There, lying in a 2-foot-deep drift by the front door, was John Okeefe. He was naked from the waist down, stripped in part by CPR efforts, bruised and bleeding. An ambulance was called immediately. Canton Police Sergeant Sean Good was among the first on scene. He found Karen in total collapse over John's frozen body. According to Sergeant Good's testimony, Karen repeatedly wailed, "I hit him. I hit him." Desperate, anguished, not understanding how the man she loved could be lying there in the snow. The life that had warmed him now drained away in the freezing temperature. Paramedics rushed John to the hospital, but it was too late. By 7:59 a.m. John Okeefe was pronounced dead. A forensic autopsy 2 days later revealed blunt impact injuries to the head, and death by hypothermia. In plain terms, he had been knocked about and then frozen to death in the storm. No obvious defensive wounds or scuffles were found on his body, aside from head trauma. At the scene that night, investigators had gathered key pieces of evidence: a broken cocktail glass and fragments of a shattered tail light in the snow, and John's own DNA later found on a piece of plastic from Karen's SUV tail light. They noted that Karen's blood alcohol, estimated from her interview later that morning, would have been roughly 0.13 to 0.29% at 12:45 a.m., well above the legal driving limit. Within hours, the Canton police had begun an intensive investigation. Detectives swarmed both homes, the Albert and Okeefe residences, while state troopers took over as the lead case agents. Investigators dusted for prints, bagged evidence, even blood-coated snow in plastic cups, and interviewed the half-awake witnesses still in their pajamas. By the time the blizzard abated, the fundamental facts were clear. John Okeefe died that night from a blow to the head and exposure in the cold. But the pressing question remained: how? Just days after John's body was discovered, authorities had gathered enough to make an arrest. On February 2, 2022, Karen Reed was brought into Stoughton District Court. She pleaded not guilty to charges of manslaughter, motor vehicle homicide, and leaving the scene of an accident causing death. Her bail was set at $100,000, which she soon posted. But the case against her was only growing. On June 10, 2022, a Norfolk County grand jury handed down a dramatic indictment. Prosecutors upgraded the charges to include second-degree murder along with manslaughter and leaving the scene. Investigators told the court they believed Karen had deliberately backed her Lexus into John on that dark street, then tried to cover it up in the early morning chaos. She pleaded not guilty again to the new charges and was released pending trial. In the courtroom and in the press, each side began to spin its version of events. Prosecutors painted Red as a drunken driver who panicked after a deadly accident. They highlighted the physical evidence, the taillight fragments in the snow, traces of John's DNA on those fragments, and the broken glass from a water glass at the scene. Police noted that Good's first arrival report described Karen as hysterical and close to fainting, insisting repeatedly she must have hit John with her car. The medical examiner's report, while officially listing undetermined manner, noted that John's injuries were consistent with a forceful impact, a crash, followed by hours alone in the cold. By contrast, the defense unleashed a shocking counter-narrative, a cover-up. Reed's lawyers argued from the start that their client had found John dying from an unrelated assault, not killed by her vehicle. They painted a picture of complicity among law enforcement and the partygoers. In open court on May 24, 2023, Alan Jackson Reed's lead attorney bluntly accused the Massachusetts State Police and nearly everyone at the Albert's party of scheming together. "Certainly the Massachusetts State Police is involved," Jackson declared, listing names. "Brian Albert is involved. Jennifer McCabe is involved. Every single one of them. We're not going to rest until we get to the bottom of exactly who's behind this cover-up." Moments later, a tearful Karen herself told reporters outside the court, "We know who did it. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know." She insisted that she had been the one desperately trying to save John's life. "I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in his blood. I was the only one trying to save his life," she sobbed. Prosecutors were outraged by these allegations. At a hearing back in May 2023, Norfolk Assistant DA Adam Lally sharply countered Jackson's dog bite theory. Defense experts had pointed to teeth marks on John's arm as evidence he was mauled by the Alberts' dog in a fight inside the house. Lally gripped the autopsy photo and fired back, "There is no evidence that Mr. Okeefe was beaten and left for dead." And on camera, District Attorney Michael Morrissey tried to tamp down the conspiracy talk. "Conspiracy theories are not evidence," he told the press that summer. He warned that a vast law enforcement plot involving cops, EMTs, and the medical examiner was completely contrary to the evidence. Still, the unusual claims forced investigators to re-examine everything. The state police quietly launched an internal review of Trooper Michael Proctor, the case's lead detective, after defense lawyers uncovered his personal text messages. Those messages showed Proctor chatting with friends who were at the scene, including one of the Alberts, raising questions about undisclosed loyalties. On March 13, 2024, the Massachusetts State Police confirmed it had opened a potential violation probe into Proctor's conduct. Proctor's attorney insisted the trooper had done nothing wrong and had cooperated fully with the FBI and Internal Affairs. But the news fed Reed's narrative. She accused Proctor of hiding these ties and suggested they could explain why the investigation had zoomed in on her. Throughout 2023, the defense and prosecution filed dozens of motions. In March 2024, Judge Beverly Cannoni denied a defense bid to throw out the indictment, noting the charges were supported by extensive evidence. Evidence experts fought over accident reconstruction testimony. Reed's team brought in specialists from a firm called ARCCA to bolster the cover-up theory, while the state argued those experts were secretly being paid by Reed's side. A major hearing in early 2025 turned on that very point, with a prosecutor accusing defense lawyers of verbal gymnastics over the billing. Meanwhile, the defense also dug into unrelated details. A blogger known as Turtle Boy, who had aggressively followed the case, was actually arrested for allegedly threatening witnesses. One concrete development. In February 2024, prosecutors publicly disclosed DNA test results on the broken taillight. They said a laboratory matched Okeefe's DNA to plastic fragments from Karen's Lexus taillight. They argued this conclusively proved John had been struck by Karen's vehicle. Defense lawyers immediately fired back, touting a parallel FBI analysis that they said refuted the crash theory. An FBI expert told the court he found the damage on Karen's SUV inconsistent with having made contact with John Okeefe's body. In other words, the car didn't hit him. Prosecutors ridiculed that, accusing Reed's lawyer of defense by obfuscation. As both sides dug in, local authorities suffered reputational hits. In late 2023, a special audit of the Canton Police Department began. By April 2025, the 206-page report was released. It cataloged police mistakes, sloppy evidence collection, taking photos on cell phones, even scooping blood-soaked snow into plastic cups, but crucially found no proof of any conspiracy. Auditors wrote bluntly, "We found no evidence supporting claims that any Canton PD officers tampered with evidence, and have not discovered any information that would indicate a conspiracy to frame," Karen read. Even as it criticized procedures, an exhibit photo showed John's blood in plastic cups inside a Stop and Shop bag. The audit vindicated the idea that the police response, however flawed, had not been corrupt. Finally, after all the pre-trial battles and delays, the Karen Red case went to trial. The first trial began in April 2024. Witnesses on both sides painted wildly different pictures. Prosecution witnesses testified about John's last movements and Reed's admissions, while defense witnesses testified about secret phone calls between officers and strange events at the crime scene. But after weeks of testimony, the first jury deadlocked. On July 1, 2024, Judge Cannoni declared a mistrial due to a hung jury. The country waited as lawyers filed appeals, all denied, and braced for a second trial. The clock kept turning, but for the relatives on all sides, every day was an agonizing echo of that winter night. In April 2025, the courtroom drama resumed. Jury selection began on April 1, 2025, for the second trial. Over 3 tense days, 12 new jurors were seated. Then, witnesses were called again in May. On June 13, 2025, closing arguments were given and the jury retired to deliberate. For 4 days it wrestled with the conflicting theories of the case. On Wednesday, June 18, 2025, the verdict was read. In a stunned courtroom, Karen Reed was acquitted of the most serious charges: second-degree murder, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a death. The prosecution's theory that she intentionally ran over John was rejected. However, the jury did find her guilty of a lesser offense: driving under the influence of alcohol while causing an accident. By law, this was considered a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year. Judge Cannoni immediately sentenced Reed to 1 year of probation, the maximum for that charge. In short, the jury believed she had not killed John, but had driven drunkenly enough to be reckless. Outside the courtroom, reactions were explosive. ABC News reported that as the not guilty verdicts were announced, cheers broke out from Karen supporters gathered on the courthouse lawn. Karen wept openly and hugged her defense team on the spot. In brief remarks afterward, she thanked her amazing supporters and asserted she had been right all along. On camera, she proclaimed defiantly, "No one has fought harder for justice than John Okeefe than I have and my team." Her father and father-in-law also expressed relief and gratitude to the jury. But not everyone shared the celebration. Key witnesses who had testified against Karen were devastated. In a joint statement, family members of John Okeefe called the verdict a devastating miscarriage of justice. They said they had lost John forever and deserved better from our justice system. The Albert and McCabe families, who had lost a brother, uncle, and son that night, lamented that they mourn with John's family and lament the cruel reality that this prosecution was infected by lies and conspiracy theories spread by Karen Reed, her defense team, and some in the media. To them, the jury's decision felt like a slap in the face to the evidence they had seen. Government officials struck cautious tones. District Attorney Morrissey, speaking privately to reporters, said simply, "The jury has spoken," suggesting he would not retry her. Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan expressed disappointment, describing the outcome as disheartening and condemning what he called witness abuse in the trial. Massachusetts State Police Colonel Jeffrey Noble said the case had exposed needed reforms in police oversight and evidence handling. The Canton PD, still under scrutiny, promised to implement audit recommendations and was already changing protocols, for example, banning personal phones in investigations. As the courtroom emptied, one thing was clear: Karen Reed walked away a free woman, but her life would never be the same. News outlets noted that she and Alan Jackson, her attorney, had been talking of turning the experience into a film script and book about the case, perhaps an attempt to make sense of what happened. Meanwhile, John Okeefe's widow and family filed a wrongful death civil lawsuit against Karen and others, ensuring the courtroom battles would continue in another form. Both sides remained entrenched in their beliefs. Reed insists she was innocent of killing John, while his friends and family remain convinced otherwise. Despite the headline verdict, the Canton community remains deeply divided. For some, the case was an example of justice prevailing. Karen Reed was an innocent victim of mistaken assumptions and conspiracy hysteria. For others, it is a bitter reminder that the truth can sometimes get lost amid drama and doubt. It is telling that even after trial the story kept unfolding. In July 2025, Canton PD Sergeant Yuri Buchanek, who had investigated the case, was reassigned after being accused of mishandling evidence in unrelated matters. Other officers who testified faced internal reviews, and investigators, including those who audited the department, continued examining every scrap of evidence for the full story. In the end, the jurors in Norfolk County delivered a verdict with which few felt fully satisfied. As D.A. Morrissey said, "The jury has spoken, but what exactly had they said? Did they find reasonable doubt in the prosecution's case, or were they swayed by the defense's elaborate accusations?" Karen Reed's acquittals leave open the haunting possibility that, if she did not kill John, who did? For now, no one knows. The autopsy and crime scene tell us John died of a violent head injury in the cold, but they cannot name the culprit. In the quiet after the storm, one image persists: John's body on the snow, and Karen's tormented face above it. She insists she felt it was a tragic accident. He had family to mourn him, she had supporters rallying around her. As Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan admitted privately, "We know that we are getting a fraction of the story." Perhaps he meant that key pieces, be they motivations, hidden evidence, or blunt truth, may have gone unsaid in the glare of the trial. Justice in this case will always be bittersweet. A jury cleared Karen of murder, but it could not conjure John back from the cold. Whether one calls it vindication or failure, the verdict is final. Karen Reed walks free, aside from probation, and the official inquiry into John's death is over. Yet questions linger. As one legal analyst put it, the public will be left to wonder, what happened to John Okeefe on that snowy morning? Only those who were truly there can say with certainty. For everyone else, the echoes of Karen's cries and John's fate remain a poignant, unanswered question, a chilling legacy buried in the aftermath of that fateful verdict.